Scary stories number 2. The strange homework my son's teacher kept giving him. I recently had to move to a new city because of my job. My wife, our 10-year-old son Dylan, and I had to leave behind our quiet little life and start over in a much busier place. The pace of everything felt completely different. My wife had to find a new job, and Dylan had to leave all his friends behind and start at a new school. I kept telling myself it would all be worth it because of the raise I'd received. After about a month in our new house, it finally felt like everyone was settling in. My wife found a job she genuinely enjoyed and had already made a few new friends. Dylan adjusted surprisingly well too. He was in 3rd grade, and since this city was much bigger, his new class had far more students than his old one. Thankfully, that didn't seem to bother him. He quickly became friends with several classmates who helped him feel at home. His teacher, Mrs. Wagner, was a young woman in her early 30s, and Dylan absolutely adored her. Every afternoon, he'd come home excited, telling us how much fun he'd had in class and how Mrs. Wagner explained everything in such an interesting way. I'd only met her once, on Dylan's first day of school when I dropped him off. She seemed warm, friendly, and professional. Every evening, Dylan brought home a small homework assignment for the next day. I've never been a huge fan of homework, but Mrs. Wagner's assignments were simple, creative, and never took more than half an hour. One day, he had to interview his parents about their jobs and ask each of us 3 questions. Another day, he researched his favorite animal and shared 3 interesting facts about it. They all seemed perfectly normal. Every evening I'd ask Dylan what he'd been assigned and help if he needed it. Then, the homework started getting strange. During his 3rd week at the new school, Dylan came home looking unusually upset. When he walked into the kitchen, I asked what was wrong. "I'm fine," he replied. "So, what homework did Mrs. Wagner give you today?" "Nothing." That immediately struck me as odd. She'd given homework every single day until then. Dylan quietly went upstairs, shut himself in his room, and closed the door. That wasn't like him at all. I figured something had happened, but he simply didn't want to talk about it. He spent almost the entire evening in his room, only coming downstairs for dinner. At the table, he laughed, joked, and acted completely normal. But as soon as dinner was over, he went straight back upstairs and shut the door again. My wife and I decided to give him some space. Later that night, I went upstairs to remind him it was bedtime. When I opened his bedroom door, he was already asleep with his head resting on an open notebook. Curious, I quietly stepped closer. At the top of the page was the homework assignment. Would I miss my parents if I didn't live with them anymore? I froze. What kind of assignment was that for 9 or 10-year-olds? I kept reading. Dylan had written, "I would miss Mom and Dad very much. I love them, and they always help me. I like eating dinner with them, but like you told us today, Mrs. Wagner, if I had to, I think I could love someone else just as much." That last sentence sent chills racing down my spine. I could love someone else just as much. Those words hit me like a brick. What exactly had Mrs. Wagner been telling my son, and why? I decided not to tell my wife that night because I didn't want to scare her. Looking back, that was probably a mistake. Instead, I planned to speak with Mrs. Wagner the following morning. The next day, I drove Dylan to school like usual, but this time, I walked into the classroom with him. Mrs. Wagner was alone. She greeted me with a warm smile. "Good morning. How's Dylan adjusting to the new school?" "Pretty well," I said, "but I have a few concerns." I calmly explained everything. I wanted to ask about yesterday's homework, the one asking how much he'd miss his parents if he no longer lived with them. That's a very disturbing question for 3rd graders. And Dylan wrote that he might have to love someone else someday, because you told them that. I'd really appreciate an explanation. She gave a small laugh. "Oh yes, yesterday we talked about how parents love and protect their children, but we also discussed that if something ever happened, there are other people in the world who could love and care for them too." Her answer didn't reassure me at all. Before I could press further, the students began filing into the classroom. What happened next felt wrong. The children entered in 2 perfectly straight lines. Each student walked up to Mrs. Wagner, greeted her one by one, then silently took their seat. They were unbelievably disciplined, almost unnaturally so. Dylan sat beside another boy, who remained perfectly still, his arms folded across his chest, staring straight ahead without blinking. Then I noticed Dylan doing exactly the same thing. He straightened his back. His eyes opened unusually wide. He stared without moving. I looked around the room. Every single child was focused on one thing. Mrs. Wagner. Nobody looked away, nobody spoke. Something about it made my stomach turn. Still, I convinced myself it was probably just some unusual morning routine. I left, though I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I decided I'd wait and see if another strange assignment came home before taking any further action. That afternoon, I left work early so I could pick Dylan up myself. When the final bell rang, children poured through the school gates laughing, shouting, and running to their parents. Except Mrs. Wagner's class. They walked out together, perfectly synchronized, step for step. Not one child broke formation. I'd never seen anything like it. Dylan climbed into the car without saying a word. He stared straight ahead. "Dylan, are you okay?" "Yeah." That was all he said. The drive home was completely silent. As soon as we arrived, he walked upstairs, entered his room, and quietly closed the door. I knew something was terribly wrong. I just couldn't figure out what. I decided to wait until my wife came home before telling her everything. About 30 minutes later, she arrived, and I sat her down. As I explained everything, the homework, Mrs. Wagner, the strange behavior in class, the synchronized walk after school, I watched the concern spread across her face. "Maybe I should go talk to him," she said quietly. "Maybe he just needs his mom." I nodded. She went upstairs while I waited anxiously in the living room. About 15 minutes later, Dylan walked downstairs. He was carrying his notebook. "Dad, can you help me with my homework?" "Of course," I said. "Let's see what you've got." He handed me the notebook. I looked at the assignment written across the top of the page. There was only one sentence. "Find the best way to inject your parents with an anesthetic." I barely finished reading it before a sharp pain exploded in my neck. I looked down. A syringe was sticking out of my skin. Dylan stood behind me, holding it. His face was completely blank, emotionless. Everything around me began fading into darkness. The last thing I remember was Dylan standing over me as I collapsed onto the floor. I don't know how much time passed before I woke up. The first thing I heard was my wife screaming, "Dylan's gone! Dylan's gone!" I forced myself to lift my head. There was a tiny puncture mark on her neck. She'd been injected too. I tried to stand, but whatever they'd given us hadn't completely worn off. My body barely responded. I managed to move one arm just enough to reach my phone and call the police. I told them everything. They immediately dispatched officers and began searching for Dylan. That's when I noticed the clock. It was already 9 o'clock the next morning. I called the school. A woman answered. I asked if Dylan from Mrs. Wagner's class had arrived. There was a long pause. "No, I'm sorry. We haven't seen him today." Then she added something that made my blood run cold. "Actually, none of Mrs. Wagner's students showed up today." Another pause. "And Mrs. Wagner didn't come to work either." I slowly lowered the phone. My wife had heard every word. Neither of us said anything. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, Dylan has disappeared, along with Mrs. Wagner and every single child from her class. Every family has the exact same story. Each child injected their parents with some kind of drug. By the time the parents woke up, their child was gone. No one knows where they are. No one knows if they're all together. No one knows whether Mrs. Wagner is with them. Was this planned from the very beginning? Why did the children all begin acting so strangely? Were they hypnotized, drugged, brainwashed? Or is something far more terrifying behind all of this? My son was diagnosed with something far worse than cancer. "Mommy, my groin hurts." At the time, how could I have known those 5 simple words would become the beginning of every parent's worst nightmare? Like any mother would, I knelt down and said, "Let me take a look." My 5-year-old son pulled down his pants. The moment I saw him, my heart dropped. His testicles were swollen, bright red, and badly inflamed. I fought to stay calm, trying to think of what it could be, but no matter how hard I tried, my mind kept jumping to the worst possible conclusion. The night before, I'd given him a bath, and everything had looked completely normal. So what on earth had happened? Doing everything I could not to scare him, I quietly told him to pull his pants back up, put on his shoes, and come with me. 20 minutes later, we were sitting in a doctor's office. After examining my son, the doctor asked him to wait outside while he spoke to me privately. "Is it bad?" I asked. He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It was as if my question barely scratched the surface of how serious the situation really was. "Is it cancer?" I whispered. "Please, have a seat," he said. I'll be honest, in all my years practicing medicine, I've never seen anything like this. I've already spoken with a colleague, and your son needs an ultrasound immediately. My eyes filled with tears. "Please tell me he's going to be okay." "I can't promise that," he admitted. "But if this does turn out to be a form of cancer, testicular cancer is often one of the most treatable." He paused before asking, "You said he's only 5? I nodded. "I don't understand. How is this even possible?" "That's exactly what's concerning," he replied. "He hasn't even reached puberty yet. This simply isn't normal for a child his age." Before making any conclusions, he explained, "We needed to see the ultrasound results." Before I left, he handed me a referral with the hospital's address and appointment time. He also told me to apply an ice pack every couple of hours in case the swelling got worse. The next morning, I drove straight to the hospital where we met Dr. Jasper Harris. He greeted me politely before crouching down to my son's eye level. "Hey there, buddy. What's your name?" My son answered with a shy smile. Their small talk irritated me. All I wanted was for the tests to be over. The sooner they finished, the sooner my little boy could go back to living a normal life. Dr. Harris led us to the examination room and handed my son a hospital gown. While the ultrasound was being performed, I sat alone in the waiting room pretending to read a book. My eyes scanned the pages. My mind wasn't reading a single word. Every thought I had was about my son. Sometime later, Dr. Harris walked into the waiting room. The expression on his face made my stomach sink. "Please, come with me." He led me into a room filled with medical equipment and large computer monitors. "Have a seat," He pulled a chair up beside one of the screens before displaying the ultrasound images. Oh my God. I covered my mouth. The scans showed my son's testicles enlarged to an alarming size. Both appeared completely white on the scan. "We need to operate immediately," Dr. Harris said. "I've never seen anything like this before. Whatever this mass is, it's completely overtaken both testicles." I broke down. The doctor rested a hand on my shoulder, trying to comfort me. It didn't help. "Please," I sobbed, "save my son." Because of delays caused by the pandemic, surgery couldn't be performed that same day. I was simply grateful we'd managed to get the ultrasound so quickly. I thanked God for that much and tried to stay calm. My son, meanwhile, seemed almost completely unaware of how serious everything was, or at least, that's what I wanted to believe. On the drive home, he sat quietly in his car seat before suddenly speaking. "Mom?" I looked at him in the rearview mirror. "Yeah, sweetheart. Grandma says that when people die, they go to heaven." A lump formed in my throat. "Is that true?" I couldn't answer. Why was a 5-year-old asking about death? Had one of the doctors said something to him? Was it just coincidence? Or somehow, did he already know how sick he really was? A tear rolled down my cheek. "I don't know, sweetheart." The day of the surgery arrived. My son lay unconscious on the operating table, while the surgical team prepared to remove what everyone believed was a massive tumor. Just before the anesthesia took effect, he started crying. "I want you to stay with me," he whispered. Something about the way he said it made my heart shatter. It felt like he wanted to say, "Stay with me in case I don't wake up." I stood silently in the corner of the cold operating room, dressed in a surgical gown, gloves, a mask, and protective goggles. I stared at the floor, trying not to imagine the future. Would my little boy be bullied? Would he grow up feeling different? Would anyone ever love him the way he deserved? Those thoughts raced endlessly through my mind. The doctors had told me not to watch if I didn't think I could handle it. I had every intention of looking away, but the moment I heard the first incision, I couldn't stop listening. The room suddenly went silent. The medical staff crowded around the table, blocking my view. I rose onto my tiptoes, trying to see past them. "Oh my God," one nurse whispered. "What the?" the surgeon muttered. A series of wet sounds echoed through the room. Something hit the floor. For a split second, I thought it was blood. The surgeon and nurses suddenly stepped backward. One nurse gasped, dropped her instrument, and ran out of the room. The sounds didn't stop. I looked toward the floor near the surgeon's feet. Something was moving. At first, I thought they were tiny snakes. Then I realized they weren't. When the staff stepped aside, I finally saw what had happened. I wish I hadn't. What everyone believed was a tumor wasn't a tumor at all. It was a nest of living parasites. They writhed and twisted as they spilled from the surgical site, dropping onto the operating table and the floor. The entire room froze. The next thing I remember was darkness. I fainted and hit my head on the tile floor. When I came to, I was sitting in a chair in the recovery area. The evening sun poured through the windows. A nurse approached with a paper cup of water. "Ma'am?" I blinked several times before my vision cleared. "My son," I said immediately, trying to stand. "My son, is he okay?" She gently placed a hand on my shoulder and eased me back into the chair. "He's okay," she said softly. "There were a few complications, but the surgery is over." "A few complications?" I laughed bitterly. That's one way to describe it. "He lost some blood, but he's stable. You'll be able to see him in a few hours." Later, I spoke with the surgeon. When I asked what those creatures actually were, he shook his head. "We're still not certain. We've run every test we can, but we don't know exactly what kind of parasite we're dealing with. We've also checked to see if anything remains inside him." He paused. "We can't guarantee he's completely clear. For now, we'll start him on antiparasitic medication. It's the best option we have." That was all anyone would tell me. Not long afterward, several people wearing black suits arrived. They questioned me. They questioned my son, the surgeon, both nurses. Who were they? I have absolutely no idea. 2 months have passed since the operation. My son spent nearly 6 weeks in a rehabilitation center before finally coming home. The entire ordeal left me with severe anxiety. The very first night he was back, I couldn't sleep. Every few minutes I'd get out of bed just to make sure he was still breathing peacefully. The lack of sleep forced me to cut back on work. Money became tight. My ex-husband barely paid child support. At least the anxiety medication has finally helped me get a few hours of sleep. The doctors discharged my son with a clean bill of health, aside from recovering from surgery. As far as they could tell, everything else looked normal, or so they believed. Yesterday morning, I was eating cereal while watching TV when my son slowly walked into the kitchen. He rubbed his eyes. Then he quietly said 5 words. "Mommy, my eyes hurt." Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode. If you have any thoughts about what happened, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.